Greetings. In this video, you will hear the most interesting and scary 3 horror stories. I publish stories every day, so if you like these stories, you can subscribe so you don't lose my channel. Enjoy watching. The Other Me. It was supposed to be a normal Friday night for Mark. After a long week of work, he had finally found some free time to relax at home. He was looking forward to a quiet evening, a pizza, and a good movie. What he didn't expect was for his life to be turned upside down by something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself. It started when Mark returned home from work. He had barely unlocked the door when he heard a strange sound from inside, a muffled voice echoing from his living room. Confused, he stepped inside, calling out, "Hello?" The silence answered him back. There, sitting on the couch, was a man who looked exactly like him. The same dark hair, the same sharp jawline, the same clothes he had been wearing earlier. It was his face, but it wasn't him. The stranger was sitting with his legs crossed, eyes staring blankly ahead, as if he were waiting for something. Mark froze in the doorway. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking. The doppelganger didn't respond. It just sat there, eerily still. Then, as if hearing Mark's voice for the first time, it slowly turned its head, fixing him with an unsettling gaze. Its lips curled into a smile, but there was something wrong with it, something off. It was too wide, too perfect, and it didn't reach the eyes. "You've been gone a long time," the doppelganger said in Mark's voice, but it wasn't his voice. It was deeper, colder, with an eerie calmness that made Mark's stomach churn. Mark didn't move. He wanted to turn and run, but his legs felt like they were made of stone. His heart pounded in his chest as the figure stood up from the couch. It took slow, deliberate steps towards him, and Mark instinctively took a step back. But no matter how far he moved, the figure remained a step ahead, closing the gap between them. The doppelganger spoke again, its voice barely a whisper now. "You've been living a lie, Mark. Don't you want to know the truth?" Mark's mind raced. He had heard of doppelgangers before, superstitions, legends of people who met their exact double, only to have their lives ruined. But this felt real. This felt wrong. Before Mark could respond, the doppelganger grabbed him by the shoulders. Mark gasped, but the touch wasn't cold. It was too warm, like it was burning through his skin. "The truth is, I'm you," the figure whispered, "and you've been living in my world." The words sent a chill through Mark's spine. His mind reeled. He had never felt more disoriented. He had to get away, but where could he run? It was him, his reflection, his double. How could he escape himself? In a panic, Mark shoved the doppelganger away, and the figure staggered back. Mark bolted toward the door, but as his hand reached for the doorknob, he felt something cold brush against his skin. He spun around, but the room was empty. The doppelganger was gone. Shaking, Mark stepped outside, trying to calm himself. But as soon as he turned his head, there it was again, the figure of the other him, standing at the end of the street, watching him. He felt his heart stop. This wasn't possible. His stomach churned as he realized that wherever he went, the doppelganger would be there. And worse, it seemed to know things about him that no one could. Mark spent the next several days in a state of paranoia, constantly on edge. Every mirror he passed reflected two of him. Every glance he made, he could feel the doppelganger lurking behind him. He couldn't escape, and the more time passed, the more the lines between himself and the double blurred. He started seeing things from the other's perspective, his own thoughts becoming distorted, his memories twisting in unnatural ways. One night, as Mark lay awake in bed, he heard the faintest sound, a knock on the window. He looked up to see the doppelganger's face staring in through the glass. its eyes wide and gleaming with malice. Mark's chest tightened. He couldn't live like this anymore. He couldn't run, couldn't hide. His doppelganger had taken over everything, his life, his reality, and even his thoughts. The last thing Mark saw before everything went dark was the doppelganger's smile. The smile that had once been his. The man who knew too much. Catherine had always been cautious, but it wasn't until her husband, Tom, came home one evening with a story that would haunt her forever that she began to understand what true fear was. Tom wasn't an easily frightened man, and for him to be this shaken, this disturbed, meant something had happened that Catherine couldn't comprehend. It started with a late-night business trip. Tom had been away for 2 days, attending meetings in a neighboring city, and Catherine had spent the time at home, catching up on some work and cleaning. When Tom finally returned, he seemed exhausted but in good spirits. Nothing seemed amiss at first. But that evening, after dinner, when Catherine was cleaning up, Tom asked her something that would send a wave of ice through her veins. "Did you see anyone in the neighborhood last night?" he asked, his voice distant. Catherine paused, her hand frozen in midair as she wiped the kitchen counter. "What do you mean?" "I didn't see anyone." "Why?" Tom's face darkened, a subtle change that made Catherine uneasy. He walked over to the window, staring out into the quiet street, his fingers tightening around the curtains. "I saw someone standing outside the house." At the window, Catherine's heart skipped a beat. The image of Tom standing by the window, his hand gripping the curtain in fear, flashed in her mind. She had been at home alone, safe, but suddenly the thought of someone watching her made her feel exposed. "Tom, what are you saying? Are you sure it wasn't just a neighbor or someone passing by?" she asked, her voice trembling, trying to reassure herself. But Tom shook his head slowly, a grim expression forming on his face. "No, it wasn't just anyone. It was me." Catherine's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, you?" "I mean, it was me, but it wasn't," he said. "I saw my own reflection in the window, but it wasn't right. It looked like me, but its eyes were different. Its smile was twisted, like it knew something I didn't. I swear, Catherine, it was me, but it wasn't." Catherine felt her stomach churn as she processed what he was saying. She knew her husband, knew his mannerisms, his way of thinking, his deep, logical mind. But the fear in his eyes wasn't something he could fake. He was telling the truth. Something horrible had happened to him. And that's when Catherine realized Tom had met his doppelganger. That night, Tom couldn't sleep. His restlessness was unbearable. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the figure, his own reflection, smiling at him, watching him from the shadows. The following night, it happened again. He woke up to see the shadowy figure standing by the door, watching him as he slept. It was like a dark version of himself, standing still, waiting for the right moment to do something. Something Catherine couldn't comprehend. When he spoke to Catherine the next morning, his voice was strained, his eyes hollow. "It's getting worse. It keeps watching me. I can feel it, even when I don't see it. I'm starting to forget things, small things at first. My keys, my phone. But now, I'm not sure if I'm losing my mind or if something's happening to me." Catherine had no answer. She tried to assure him it was just stress, that it was the work piling up, but deep down, she knew there was something more sinister at play. As the days passed, Tom became more withdrawn, his behavior erratic. He began speaking about things he shouldn't know, private conversations Catherine had with friends, intimate details he hadn't been present for. He would speak in a low, almost detached voice, as if he was the one observing her, not the other way around. One evening, Catherine decided to follow him when he left the house for a late-night walk. She watched him as he made his way down the street, only to stop at the edge of the sidewalk. His body went still, and when he turned around, his eyes met hers, but not with recognition. The look was cold, lifeless. He looked like a stranger wearing Tom's face. It hit her then. The man who was walking around, who had been eating dinner with her, sleeping beside her, wasn't Tom. It was his doppelgänger, and it had taken over. Frantically, Catherine raced back to the house, but when she arrived, there was no sign of Tom. His car was gone. She rushed to his study and found a note, hastily written. "I am not who you think I am. There's no escaping him. He knows everything." The house fell silent. Catherine could only stand there in disbelief. The doppelgänger had taken over her husband's life, leaving her with the terrifying knowledge that Tom was lost forever. As the days went by, Catherine's own world started to unravel. The figure that had once been Tom continued to mimic his every move, but there was always something off. It never ate, never slept, and sometimes, late at night, Catherine would catch it staring at her from the hallway, smiling in a way that felt like a warning. And one night, after another sleepless evening, Catherine woke to find Tom's face, his real face, pressed against the window, staring into her room. She rushed to the door to open it, but when she touched the handle, she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. The doppelgänger had arrived, the silent visitor. Hannah had always considered herself to be a rational person. Growing up in a small town, she had learned to be skeptical of superstitions, urban legends, and the strange stories that people often whispered about. She thought there was no such thing as ghosts, no such thing as magic, and certainly no such thing as doppelgängers. That is, until the night her life turned into a waking nightmare. It started with an ordinary evening. Hannah was home alone, sitting in her living room, enjoying a glass of wine after a long day at the office. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. It was a peaceful moment, and she was happy to finally have some time to herself. Then, at precisely 10 p.m., the knock on the door came. At first, Hannah didn't think much of it. She wasn't expecting anyone, but perhaps it was a neighbor or a delivery. When she opened the door, she froze. There, standing on her doorstep, was a woman, but not just any woman. It was her. It was a perfect copy of her, same height, same face, same hair. She wore the same blue sweater and jeans that Hannah had on at that moment. The woman looked at her with a strange smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" Hannah asked, her voice trembling slightly. The woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she just stood there staring. For a moment, Hannah thought she recognized her, perhaps a long-lost twin or someone she had met years ago. But no, she was sure she had never seen this person before. Finally, the woman spoke, her voice eerily calm. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Hannah blinked. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" The woman smiled wider, a smile that made Hannah's skin crawl. "We should. We're the same, after all." Suddenly, a chill ran down Hannah's spine. She was starting to feel dizzy, like the world around her was spinning. Her knees went weak, and she leaned against the door frame for support. Before she could say anything else, the woman stepped forward, brushing past her and into the house. Hannah felt her pulse quicken as the strange woman made herself at home, sitting down on the couch as if she belonged there. "Wait, what are you doing?" Hannah demanded, her voice now filled with confusion and fear. The woman gave her a look, as if she were being foolish. "I'm you. I'm the one you left behind." Hannah felt a sense of horror claw at her throat. What was happening? How could this person be her? She backed away, unsure whether to run or confront this intruder. The room suddenly felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in on her. "I don't understand," Hannah whispered, her heart pounding. "What do you mean? Who are you?" "I am your doppelganger," the woman said softly, almost serenely. "The version of you that never left this place. The one you were supposed to be. The one you never wanted to acknowledge." Hannah stumbled back in disbelief. "No, no, that's impossible." The woman tilted her head, as if studying her. "Is it? You've always known something wasn't quite right about your life, haven't you? You've always felt that something was missing, something was off. That's because I've been here, waiting." The words seemed to echo in the room, and a sense of déjà vu washed over Hannah. She couldn't remember a time when she hadn't felt this unease, this itch beneath her skin that told her she didn't belong in her own life. The woman's presence made everything feel wrong, like a cruel twist of fate had led her to this exact moment. "Why now?" Hannah whispered. "Why come to me now?" The doppelganger smiled, and this time it wasn't just the smile that was unsettling. There was a darkness in her eyes, a coldness that made Hannah shiver. "Because now it's time to take your place." In a blur of panic, Hannah turned and ran toward the front door. But as she reached for the handle, she felt something cold and unyielding grip her wrist. She spun around, and to her horror, the woman had moved faster than humanly possible, now standing directly behind her. "Where do you think you're going?" the woman whispered, her breath hot and foul against Hannah's ear. Hannah fought, trying to break free, but her doppelganger's grip was like iron. The more she struggled, the more she felt her strength draining away. It was as though the woman was feeding off her fear, growing stronger with every passing second. "You can't escape me," the woman said, her voice now twisted with a venomous undertone. "I've been living in your shadow for years, waiting for the right moment to step into your life. And now, I'm finally here." Hannah's mind raced. She had to get away. She had to survive. But as she looked into the eyes of the woman, her other self, she realized that there was no escape. The doppelganger knew everything about her. It knew her weaknesses, her desires, her fears. It was as if it had been living her life for years in parallel, waiting for the moment when their paths would collide. In that moment, Hannah realized the truth. She wasn't the one who had been living. She had been a shadow all along. With a scream of desperation, Hannah wrenched herself free, darting toward the back door. But as she stepped into the night, she saw the woman standing in her yard, smiling, watching her with those cold eyes. The doppelganger's laugh echoed through the air as the door slammed shut behind Hannah. No matter how far she ran, she would never escape the reflection that haunted her every step. The other her would always be there, waiting,